It was a day of diplomacy and dialogue, meetings and bilaterals in Tokyo, where the highlight was the Quad Leaders Summit. The second such in-person meeting between the leaders of the Quad, the first bilateral held right after the summit, was between the leaders of the US and India. President Biden and Prime Minister Modi affirmed their alliance to strengthen trade, technology and defence ties. They also reviewed the India-US strategic partnership and followed up on discussions from the last bilateral held last September. Biden said he is committed to making India-US ties among, quote-unquote, the closest on earth. And Prime Minister Modi spoke about the investment incentive agreement between both countries.
Mr. Prime Minister, there's so much that our countries can and will do together, and I'm committed to making U.S.-India partnership among the closest we have on earth.
मुझे विश्वास है कि हमारे बीच इंडिया यूएसए इन्वेस्टमेंट इंसेंटिव एग्रीमेंट से निवेश की दिशा में कॉन्क्रीट प्रगति देखने को मिलेगी।
It's important to note that this is the first meeting between the leaders after the invasion of Ukraine. America has criticised India's neutrality, issued blanket warnings over India's purchase of Russian oil, and tried to persuade New Delhi to isolate Russia. But the White House later stressed that the US does not view India as having been involved in any kind of a violation. And at today's meeting, Biden said Russia was on the agenda.
We also discussed the ongoing effects of Russia's brutal and unjustified invasion of Ukraine and the effect it has on the entire global world order. And the U.S. and India are going to continue consulting closely on how to mitigate these negative effects.
President Biden very much knitting together there the impact of Russia's invasion on Ukraine with his determination to deepen America's engagement throughout the Indo-Pacific. President Biden is now en route back to the United States on Air Force One after wrapping up a visit to Asia that began last Thursday, of course, with a trip first to South Korea and then those face-to-face meetings in Tokyo, not just, of course, with the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, but also with the leaders of the Quad who were present in Tokyo for that meeting at the end of President Biden's trip. We can go live now to WION's managing editor Palki Sharma Upadhyay, who has been in Tokyo covering all of these events, and she's going to help us decode one of the most crucial bilaterals of the day, which, of course, Palki, was that meeting between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Joe Biden. What progress did the two of them make, and how are they handling those tensions over Ukraine that have been pretty evident over the last few weeks?
You know, today, US President Joe Biden, in one of his remarks, said that the Quad is not a fad. And the fact that all of these four countries could come together in the middle of a pandemic in China's backyard, despite a war going on, and despite the obvious differences on Russia and Ukraine, goes on to show the commitment here. In the last 3 months since Russia invaded Ukraine, we've seen Washington and New Delhi being at odds with each other on the policy. Washington has been putting a lot of pressure on New Delhi to join the sanctions regime, or at the very least stop buying Russian oil. And India has not relented. In fact, there have been warnings of possible consequences. The US State Department or the White House Secretary, I think, also said that India should look at where it will find itself in history books and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of exchange. I think today in Tokyo, the sense that one got was that they've agreed to disagree on this one. I'm sure Ukraine was brought up in the conversation. It also made it to the joint statement. But beyond a point, I do not think that India was pushed. They spoke about the security alliance, the strategic alliance. And from what I understand, this is one of the key strategic goals of the US to ensure that India remains in its sphere or circle of friends. And so we saw a reflection of that both in the Quad meeting and then the bilateral meeting between US President Joe Biden and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. There were no statements or no indications that these differences were going to hijack the Quad agenda or their relationship. This, of course, was their first in-person meeting since the war in Ukraine broke out.
And what's the view of Prime Minister Modi and his delegation about the efforts that Joe Biden has made over the last 5 days, first in South Korea, then in Tokyo, really to deepen this idea that the American government is back and determined to achieve further engagement and influence in the Indo-Pacific? I mean, there are observers on this side of the world who think that this is all a massive game of catch-up that the United States is playing, given the inroads that China has already made in the region. Does the Indian delegation believe this idea that America is not only back, but back to stay?
I think it's the American administration that likes to push this line that America is back, the Asian pivot. I think for Asian countries, they look at what's in it for them. Today, US President Joe Biden tried to drive home the point that the war in Ukraine is not just Europe's problem, it's a global problem. But Asian countries, including India, have made it very clear that this is not theirs to fight. And I think that remains the line that India has taken, not much in terms of commentary on Joe Biden's visit to South Korea and then subsequently here. But of course, India has joined the economic platform that they've launched. India has joined the maritime surveillance that the Quad today announced. So working together, but also looking out for India's own interests, what the administration, South Bloc in New Delhi, likes to call strategic autonomy. In fact, some very interesting commentary in the local press today, Simon. They said that India does not like to be part of any alliance. India believes in partnerships, and India guards its non-aligned status or strategic autonomy very, very strongly. And this is something that all of India's partners and quote-unquote allies should understand and accept now. And this was said vis-a-vis the alliance against China, but I think it also holds true for what has happened with Russia. So that is the Indian position, that we work together on, the phrase that the Indian delegation likes to use very often is convergences and divergences. So we will build on the convergences and we will try to tide over the divergences.
Interesting stuff. Palki, always good to see you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us live there from Tokyo.